Hello, this is Morel Bernard with Lady Chatterley's Lover, the continuing story of Lady Chatterley's Lover, and we're coming soon to the end. One more video for Lady Chatterley's Lover. Alright, okay, and please, by the way, please subscribe and please share. I believe the last words were that he looked in humiliation, anger, weariness, and misery at Connie. "My lass," he said, "the world's going to put salt on thy tail." "Not if we don't let it," she said. She minded this conniving against the world less than he did. Duncan, when approached, also insisted on seeing the delinquent gamekeeper. So there was a dinner. This time in his flat. The four of them. Duncan was a rather short, broad, dark-skinned, taciturn Hamlet of a fellow with straight black hair and a weird Celtic conceit of himself. His art was all tubes and valves and spirals and strange colours, ultra-modern, yet with a certain power, even a certain purity of form and tone. Only Mellors thought it cruel and repellent. He did not venture to say so, for Duncan was almost insane on the point of his art. It was a personal cult, a personal religion with him. They were looking at the pictures in the studio, and Duncan kept his smallish brown eyes on the other man. He wanted to hear what the gamekeeper would say. He wanted already to know his thoughts. He knew Connie's and Hilda's opinions. "It is like a pure bit of murder," said Mellors at last, a speech Duncan by no means expected from a gamekeeper. "And who is murdered?" asked Hilda, rather coldly and sneeringly. "Me. It murders all the bowels of compassion in a man." A wave of pure hate came out of the artist. He heard the note of dislike in the other man's voice and the note of contempt. And he himself loathed the method or mention of bowels of compassion, sickly sentiment. Mellors stood rather tall and thin, worn-looking, gazing with flickering detachment that was something like the dancing of a moth on the wing at the pictures. "Perhaps stupidity is murdered. Sentimental stupidity," sneered the artist. "Do you think so? I think all these tubes and corrugated vibrations are stupid enough for anything, and pretty sentimental. They show a lot of self-pity and an awful lot of nervous self-opinion, seems to me." In another wave of hate, the artist's face looked yellow, but with a sort of silent hauteur, he turned the pictures to the wall. "I think we may go to the dining room," he said, and they trailed off dismally. After coffee, Duncan said, "I don't at all mind posing as the father of Connie's child, but only on the condition that she'll come and pose as a model for me. I've wanted her for years, and she's always refused." He uttered it with the dark finality of an inquisitor announcing an auto-da-fe. "Ah," said Mellors, "you only do it on condition, then?" "Quite. I only do it on that condition." The artist tried to put the utmost contempt of the other person into his speech. He put a little too much. "Well, better have me as a model at the same time," said Mellors. "Better do us in a group, Vulcan and Venus under the net of art. I used to be a blacksmith before I was a gamekeeper." "Thank you," said the artist. "I don't think Vulcan has a figure that interests me. Not even if it was tubified and titivated up." There was no answer. the artist was too haughty for further words. It was a dismal party in which the artist henceforth steadily ignored the presence of the other man, and talked only briefly as if the words were wrung out of the depths of his gloomy portentousness to the women. You didn't like him, but he's better than that, really. He's really kind, Connie explained as they left. He's a little black pup with a corrugated distemper, said Mellors. No, he wasn't nice today. And will you go and be a model to him? Oh, I don't really mind any more. He won't touch me, and I don't mind anything if it paves the way to a life together for you and me. But he'll only shit on you on canvas. I don't care. He'll only be painting his own feelings for me, and I don't mind if he does that. I wouldn't have him touch me, not for anything. But if he thinks he can do anything with his owlish artist staring, let him dare. Let him stare. He can make as many empty tubes and corrugations out of me as he likes. It's his funeral. He hated you for what you said, that his tubified art is sentimental and self-important. But, of course, it's true. Dear Clifford, I am afraid that you foresaw has happened. I'm really in love with another man, and do hope you will divorce me. I'm staying at present with Duncan in his flat. I told you he was at Venice with us. I'm awfully unhappy for your sake, but do try to take it quietly. You don't really need me anymore, and I can't bear to come back to Wrabgy. I'm awfully sorry, but do try to forgive me and divorce me and find someone better. I'm not really the right person for you. I'm too impatient and selfish, I suppose. But I can't ever come back to live with you again. And I feel so frightfully sorry about it all for your sake. But if you don't let yourself get worked up, you'll see you won't mind so frightfully. You didn't really care about me personally, so do forgive me and get rid of me. Clifford was not inwardly surprised to get this letter. Inwardly, he had known for a long time she was leaving him. But he had absolutely refused any outward admission of it. Therefore, outwardly, it came as the most terrible blow and shock to him. He had kept the surface of his confidence in a quiet serene. And that is how we are. By strength of will, we cut off for inner intuitive knowledge from admitted consciousness. This causes a state of dread or apprehension, which makes the blow 10 times worse when it does fall. Clifford was like a hysterical child. He gave Mrs. Bolton a terrible shock, sitting up in bed, ghastly and blank. Why? Sir Clifford, what's ever the matter? No answer. She was terrified lest he had a stroke. She hurried and felt his face, took his pulse. Is there a pain? Do try and tell me where it hurts you. Do tell me. No answer. Oh dear. Then I'll telephone to Sheffield for Dr. Carrington, and Dr. Lecky may as well run round straight away. She was moving to the door when he said in a hollow tone, No. She stopped and gazed at him. His face was yellow, blank, and like the face of an idiot. Do you mean you'd rather I'd fetch the doctor? Yes, I don't want him, came the satirical voice. Oh, but Sir Clifford, you're ill, and I daren't take the responsibility. I must send for the doctor, or I shall be blamed. A pause. Then the hollow voice said, I'm not ill. I'm not ill. My wife isn't coming back. It was as if An image spoke. Not coming back? You mean her ladyship? Mrs. Bolton moved a little nearer to the bed. Oh, don't you believe it. You can trust her ladyship to come back. The image in the bed did not change, but it pushed a letter over the counterpane. Read it, said his voice. Why? If it's a letter from her ladyship, I'm sure her ladyship wouldn't want me to read her letter to you, Sir Clifford. You can tell me what she says if you wish. Read it, repeated the voice. Why? If I must? I do it to obey you, Sir Clifford, she said, and she read the letter. Well, I am surprised at her ladyship, she said. She promised so faithfully she'd come back. The face on the bed seemed to deepen its expression of wild but motionless distraction. Mrs. Bolton looked at it and was worried. She knew what she was up against, male hysteria. She had not nursed soldiers without learning something about that very unpleasant disease. She was a little impatient of Sir Clifford. Any man in his senses must have known his wife was in love with somebody else and was going to leave him. Even she was sure Sir Clifford was inwardly absolutely aware of it, only he wouldn't admit to himself. If he would have admitted it and prepared himself for it, or if he would have admitted it and actively struggled with his wife against it, that would have been acting like a man. But no, he knew it, and all the time tried to kid himself it wasn't so. He felt the devil twisting his tail and pretended it was the angel smiling on him. The state of falsity had now brought on that crisis of falsity and dislocation, hysteria, which is a form of insanity. It comes, she thought to herself, hating him a little, because he always thinks of himself. He's so wrapped up in his own immortal self that when he does get a shock, he's like a mummy tangled in its own bandages. Look at him, look at him. But hysteria is dangerous, and she was a nurse. It was her duty to pull him out. Any attempt to rouse his manhood and his pride would only make him worse, for his manhood was dead, temporarily, if not finally. He would only squirm softer and softer like a worm and become more dislocated. The only thing was to release his self-pity, like the lady in Tennyson. He must weep or he must die. So Mrs. Bolton began to weep first. She covered her face with her hand and burst into little wild sobs. I would never have believed it of her ladyship, I wouldn't, she wept, suddenly summoning up all her old grief and sense of woe, and weeping the tears of her own bitter chagrin. Once she started, her weeping was genuine enough, for she had had something to weep for. Clifford thought of the way he had been betrayed by the woman Connie, and in a contagion of grief, tears filled his eyes and began to run down his cheeks. He was weeping for himself. Mrs. Bolton, as soon as she saw the tears running over his blank face, hastily wiped her own wet cheeks on her little handkerchief and leaned towards him. Now, don't you fret, Sir Clifford, she said, in a luxury of emotion. Now, don't you fret. Don't. You'll only do yourself an injury. His body shivered suddenly in an indrawn breath of silent sobbing, and the tears ran quicker down his face. She laid her hand on his arm, and her own tears fell again. Again the shiver went through him like a convulsion, and she laid her arm round his shoulder. There, 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 there. Don't you fret, then, don't you? Don't you fret, she moaned to him, while her own tears fell. And she drew him to her, and held her arms round his great shoulders while he laid his face on her bosom and sobbed, shaking and hulking his huge shoulders, while she softly stroked his dusky blonde hair and said, "There, there, there, there then, never you mind then." And he put his arms round her and clung to her like a child, wetting the bib of her starched white apron and the bosom of her pale blue cotton dress with his tears. He had let himself go altogether at last. So at length she kissed him and rocked him on her bosom, and in her heart she said to herself, "Oh, Sir Clifford, oh high and mighty Chatterleys, is this what you've come down to?" And finally he even wept to sleep like a child, and she felt worn out and went to her own room, where she laughed and cried at once with a hysteria of her own. It was so ridiculous. It was so awful, such a come down, so shameful, and it was so upsetting as well. After this, Clifford became like a child with Mrs. Bolton. He would hold her and rest his head on her breast, and when she only lightly kissed him, he said, "Yes, do kiss me, do kiss me." And when she sponged his great blonde body, he would say the same, "Do kiss me." And she would lightly kiss his body anywhere, half in mockery. And he lay with a queer blank face like a child, with a bit of the wonderment of a child. And he would gaze on her with wide, childish eyes and a relaxation of Madonna worship. It was sheer relaxation on his part, letting go all his manhood and sinking back to a childish position that was really perverse. And then he would put his hand into her bosom and feel her breast and kiss them in exultation. The exaltation of perversity, of being a child when he was a man. Mrs. Bolton was both thrilled and ashamed. She both loved and hated it. Yet she never rebuffed nor rebuked him, and they drew into a closer physical intimacy, an intimacy of perversity, when he was a child stricken with an apparent candour, an apparent wonderment that looked almost like a religious exaltation, the perverse and literal rendering of, "Except ye become again as a little child," while she was the magna mater, full of power and potency, having the great blonde child man under her will and her stroke entirely. The curious thing was that when the child man, which Clifford was now, and which he had been becoming for years, emerged into the world, it was much sharper and keener than the real man he used to be. This perverted child man was now a real businessman. When it was a question of affairs, he was an absolute he-man, sharp as a needle and impervious as a bit of steel. When he was out among men, seeking his own ends and making good his collier workings, he had an almost uncanny shrewdness, hardness, and a straight, sharp punch. It was as if his very passivity and prostitution to the magna mater gave him insight into material business affairs, and lent him a certain remarkable inhuman force. The wallowing in private emotion, the utter abasement of his manly self seemed to lend him a second nature, cold, almost visionary, business clever. In business, he was quite human. And in this Mrs. Bolton triumphed. "How he's getting on," she would say to herself in pride, "and that's my doing, my word. He's never had got on like this with Lady Chatterley." She was not the one to put a man forward. She wanted too much for herself. At the same time, In some corner of a weird female soul, how she despised him and hated him. He was to her the fallen beast, the squirming monster. And while she added and abetted him all she could, away in the remotest corner of her ancient, healthy womanhood, she despised him with a savage contempt that knew no bounds. The merest tramp was better than he. His behaviour with regard to Connie was curious. He insisted on seeing her again. He insisted, moreover, on her coming to Wrabby. On this point, he was finally and absolutely fixed. Connie had promised to come back to Wrabby faithfully. "But is it any use?" said Mrs. Bolton. "Can't you let her go and be rid of her?" "No," she said. She was coming back, and she's got to come. Mrs. Bolton opposed him no more. She knew what she was dealing with. "I needn't tell you what effect your letter has had on me," he wrote to Connie, to London. "Perhaps you can imagine it if you try, though no doubt you won't trouble to use your imagination on my behalf. I can only say one thing in answer. I must see you personally here at Wragby before I can do anything. You promised faithfully to come back to Wragby, and I hold you to the promise. I don't believe anything nor understand anything until I see you personally here under normal circumstances. I need to tell you that nobody here suspects anything, so your return will be quite normal. Then if you feel after we have talked things over that you still remain in the same mind, no doubt we can come to terms." Join me. Join me in the next video, the final video of Lady Chatterley's Lover. Please subscribe, please share. Join me in the next video, the last video, the concluding video of Lady Chatterley's Lover with me, Wrabby. See you then.